Hello there everybody and welcome back to my second video in the series, The Beginner's Guide to Football Manager. Today we are going to be following up from the first video, which was how to pick your team. I hope you've all watched it. If not, I have linked it and hopefully it'll pop up in the top corner if I've sussed out how to do that properly. I very much recommend you do go and watch that. So yeah, this is definitely a follow-up video, and the idea being that you've just picked a team. For this one I've picked United because it's the team I know pretty well. And when you do start, you'll run into this age-old issue, which is, where do I go for a formation? So obviously you come to your tactics page and you'll be met with choosing a tactical style. Obviously if you're new to the game, you don't necessarily know what your style is going to be yet. So I'm hoping to just kind of give you a quick little rundown of how I personally go about trying to set up a new tactic and a new team. And just sort of the kind of little areas that I think are good places to look and just try and help point you in the right direction. This isn't obviously a masterclass of, I'm going to show you how to make a formation and it'll work every single time, 100% of the time, because I don't really believe that's the thing. Of course, obviously, you do always have the option to just go on to the internet, and there's always hundreds of people posting their game-breaking sort of formations that are just like a plug and play. And if you go to these top teams, put them in, and you'll win just about everything. But for me, that's not as fun. I always like to see one that I've just sort of tweaked myself, and yeah. So one thing I recommend you do before you start all of this is to have a look at your team report and just see what your assistant thinks. You know, have a look at, obviously being United here, there is a lot of strengths and quite a few weaknesses. But if you just kind of have a rough idea of sort of the players that sort of play well together, and you can sort of start, just trying to get an idea up in your head. Also, you have the squad depth tab. So if you go on that, and then you can kind of play about with different sort of formations here. So for example, if you like the 4-2-3-1, like I personally do, though I do prefer the wide one, you can see sort of what kind of depth you have in each role, and just have a play about and see, like if you want to look for a 3 centre-back one, you can see that there's only really, I wouldn't be happy with that personally. There is depth to an extent, but I'm not really happy with that. Obviously this doesn't show everything, like your actual roles, it's just showing how good people are naturally in that position. So again, I think the 4-2-3-1 is usually a pretty decent benchmark. You can usually get a solid team in, and by the looks of it, United they look reasonably okay across the board. If you do ask me, obviously you can always see what other staff members think. If you're desperate, you can see what your under-23s coach thinks. It doesn't really make much of a difference. It's just there to give you a sort of idea. So like I said, I kind of go with the 4-2-3-1 just for demonstration purposes. In terms of choosing the tactical style, it does make a difference, but personally I just tend to stick with like the vertical tiki-taka or just any of these sort of top 4. They're the ones that seem to do the best for me personally, but again, each to their own. Obviously just sort of think about the team that you're playing as and how you want to play, and just read these little bullet points of what these possession based sort of formations do, these styles I should say, and which one you think fits what you're hoping. So for me, like I say, I personally like the vertical tiki-taka. You then click choose a formation, and these are sort of the 3 best ones that the game recommends you go for. Obviously, because I didn't bother to do my research properly, mine isn't on there, so I'll just go and select it. Okay, so we're now met with this, and this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting, because now it's all about trying to pick your actual player roles. So the first thing you can do is just do a quick pick and have your assistant throw in all of your players who are the best at that position at that time. Obviously, it's not an exact science because this is pre-season. Everyone's completely unfit. And you've got people away on sort of international duty depending on where you start. But yeah, so now it's just a case of going through and try to decide how you want your players to play. So for me, I know a lot of people tend to go for the sweeper keeper, but I'm not the biggest fan of it. I always feel that unless you're playing at the absolute top level, it always leads to more goals than it saves. But that's just my opinion. Again, for me, I prefer wing backs, stick them on automatic. They tend to do better for me. I prefer them to get a bit further forward and just have a slightly more defensive midfielder. More defensive midfielder, I should say. So, for example, have McTominay, because if he's also set to defend, he should then help sort of stay further back when we're attacking. And then, obviously, if we concede further up the pitch, he'll then already start a bit deeper, which will then give us a better chance of being able to break the counter and protect us from that sense. Sort of the aim of the game here is to try and plan the numbers. So when you have somebody who's on support versus on attack, I mean, you can see what happens when you move them, when you switch them. It just moves them up the pitch. That is kind of their starting position when you get a possession back. So if they're on attack, they're going to start a few yards further forward. If they're on support or defend, a few yards further back. You just need to kind of tailor it, have a play about, see what works for you, what doesn't. The kind of ideal that I try and go with is sort of have 5 players further up the pitch set to attack or support or anything. So for here, obviously, we have James, Fernandes, Rashford and Martial. And I'd probably switch Pogba to something like a Mazzala on attack, which would then make up the 5. So that when we're attacking, they'll be the 5 main men. And then on defence, obviously, we've got the back 4 and McTominay because he's set to defend. And I tend to find having that balance just sort of, gives you a nice balance. Shock. The last thing to really look at in terms of building formations is your 3 boxes here, which it's all trial and error, really. There's no real, this is sort of, these are the ones that you have to have on no matter what, because again, what'll work for Man United won't work for Burton Albion, for example, or it won't work for a team in the 3rd tier of the Dutch league, again, as an example. It's all very personalised to your team, how you're going to have everything. Depending on which style you had, does give you sort of preset ones, which realistically, unless your team is massively unsuited to what you've chosen, it's going to put you in the right stead at least. I probably wouldn't mess about with it for too much for the first few games, so I'll just get an idea of how things work in. But yeah, that's kind of it. Then I suppose the only other thing is I would also strongly recommend you use the plus up here to just create a 2nd and 3rd tactic. The way I usually do it is I tend to have one that's sort of like my main go-to tactic week in, week out, which would be, in this example, the 4-2-3-1. I then also like to have sort of a very defensive one for if we are playing a Champions League game, whatever, we we smash and grab a goal against a team like your Barcelonas, your Real Madrids, that ordinarily we wouldn't be expecting to win. Or, if it's a 2-leg game, you've won the first one, you've conceded in the second, and you don't want to concede a second, otherwise, you might start looking at losing on away goals or whatever. Just have one that's like a park the bus kind of formation. For me, that's just the best way to do it. And then the second one, or the third one I should say, is sort of your absolute overload, throwing the kitchen sink at them, which is, I mean, it sort of is what it is, isn't it? It's exactly what it says on the tin. You know, you're a couple of goals, or you may be a goal behind it in an absolute must-win game, and this is the sort of formation where you're going to try and throw everything at them. So maybe, I don't know, something on. Apparently I'm not allowed to put a winger there. There we go. You know, so you're just massively overloading the attack and just trying to force the issue. Obviously, in this, I've not played about with the actual roles too much, but there you go. You know, so it's like I say, if you're trailing a game that you need to win, or you're drawing one that you need to win, if you can switch this at 60 minutes, absolutely overload their box and just literally outnumber them until you get the goal, sort of thing. Those are my sort of three ideas for my three formations, and I've never really had any issues. More often than not, I will use this probably 90% of the time, but yeah, the others are always there. Obviously, it's free to have 2 extra formations. It doesn't hurt. Granted, it means that you don't quite learn them as quickly as you could, but really, for the tactical flexibility mid-game, it's just an absolute no-brainer for me. So yeah, I think that's it for my tactics guide. My next one will hopefully be setting up a scouting network and where to go from there, and just where to get started. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you then. Have a good one, guys.